Well, here with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman Lande is a former member of the Knesset, a former diplomat in Cairo and a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for Strategic Affairs. Welcome, Ruth. Good to see you. And we're also joined by Jonathan Elkhoury. He's a public diplomacy advisor and advocate. Good to have you with us, Jonathan. Welcome. So, Ruth, I'll start with you. Do you see anything different this time around? Any reason for optimism that we might be moving towards some sort of deal to free the hostages?
It seems that there's more of a urgency in the Israeli government to make a deal at the moment. It doesn't seem that there is a huge difference in what the Egyptians had offered in terms of the framework of a deal. And it seems that the Hamas is very eager to accept talking to the Fatah and so-called having them take over the Rafah crossing, because they know that the Fatah will not stand in their way, or nor can they, if they even wanted to, in actually having whatever they wanted either smuggled in or brought in from that crossing.
All right. Jonathan, do you think Hamas's renewed interest in a deal is anything to do with those comments we had from incoming President Donald Trump earlier this week? He said there would be all hell to pay if the hostages are not free by January 20th.
I think it's a combination. I think, first of all, they do understand that Trump doesn't really mess around, and whatever he says, he might act on it and might not, but no one knows actually what he might do. But on the other hand, I think they got to a point where they are completely isolated from everyone else. Qatar suddenly decided to cut out, although like there's speaks and talks, and maybe Qatar are going to go back to the negotiating table in order to help. But one of their main kind of, you can say, forces that helped them to maintain some sort of dignity and some sort of fighting was Hezbollah. That at the end of the day, although Hassan Nasrallah promised that they will never break the deal, they will never cut off the ties with Hamas, Soleimani, Naim Qassem, the head of Hezbollah terrorist organization, on the 27th of November agreed to split the fronts and basically throw Hamas under the bus. And that's, I think, plays a lot of role into Hamas's decisions, where they have to maintain some sort of stability, or maybe some sort of, you can say, fiction to themselves that they wanna stay in some sort of a position, so they're going to do something about it.
And Ruth,
that matter.
Just going back to your point on whether the Palestinian Authority or Fatah would be able to assert any control in Gaza at this point, you think that Hamas still has a level of control that would make that impossible?
I do think that it would make it impossible, and I think that the Hamas has not moved 1 millimeter. I think that the only leverage, at the words of the President of the United States, the President-elect, was on the Israeli government rather than on Hamas, even though you're absolutely right. They are isolated, but they hadn't moved one little bit. And what they will do is exactly what they said they would do before. From their point of view, having Fatah in the crossing is like having the crossing for themselves.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Well, let's go down to Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where our correspondent Zach Anders is standing by. Zach, what about where you are? Any reason to be more hopeful this time around?
Well, it's hard to say, especially when you talk to the families, knowing that there's not any hope until this moment comes to a close, when this chapter ends and their family members, their loved ones, are back here home in Israel. But we do have some movement. And what's the most fascinating element here, Laura, is that there's still a sitting administration. I know this is a lame duck term now for President Biden on his way out. And these incoming Trump administration officials seem to be the ones that are getting more momentum right now than anyone that's currently holding office inside the Biden admin. The U.S. envoy to the Middle East, the incoming special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, an American businessman that has been named, at least, by Trump. He does not have that title officially yet. This administration is not in office yet, so he does not have this official capacity still. Flying flying into Doha, holding meetings with the Qatari PM. He's met with Netanyahu in the last week. And there's now renewed talk that Hamas will make its way to Doha once again. Remember, this saga has included them leaving Qatar. They're going to send another delegation. Qatar back in the mix is stated as potentially hosting new mediation efforts along with Egyptian officials in Cairo, and that they'll once again collect, meet, and host a fresh round of talks, and that Steve Witkoff here is spearheading these efforts. He's quoted in Reuters today as stating that his effort right now is to get a deal done before January 20th, and that they're trying to get a deal done this month. Now, those red lines we've talked about where Hamas has stated that they're not willing to agree to a deal to release hostages based on the framework that the U.S. proposed back in early August, we're now hearing through sources to i24 News from Hamas that they're willing to leave some of these red lines and actually come to the table and make a deal. Is that going to be what happens? We'll have to wait, of course, but it is some interesting moments here, and especially just with the historical precedent in these moments. I won't speak out of turn, but I can't remember a time in the history books when you have an incoming president's administration in the States essentially on the sidelines at this point, even as a lame duck. But to see these men like Steve Witkoff, again, they don't hold official titles yet. The new administration's not in charge, but here they are flying around the Middle East, likely on their own, at their own expense, making these moves and meeting with these leaders of Qatar, leaders of Israel, and trying to get a deal done before they're even in office. It's quite remarkable.
Well, let's hope some fresh faces can bring about a different result for the hostages. Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there down in Tel Aviv. Now, deplorable and fanatical, that's how the Israeli government has described the latest report by Amnesty International. It accuses Israel of carrying out a genocide in Gaza, but it's been disputed by its own subsidiary, Amnesty Israel, and buried deep in the report, the authors admit that they had to redefine the word genocide in order to make it fit the case in Gaza. Our Lynn Plachmeyer has the story.
Amnesty International is accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. The organization analyzed satellite images documenting devastation, fieldwork and ground reports from Gazans and says its findings serve as a, quote, wake-up call for the international community.
We found the repeated use of dehumanizing language. We found statements calling for genocidal act and other crimes under international law. These crimes were and continue to be deliberate actions, deliberately calculated to bring about the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. They have also been perpetrated with total impunity. The conclusion that Israel is committing genocide is unequivocal, evidence-based.
The people within the Gaza Strip welcomed Amnesty's findings.
Everyone is seeing that Israel for more than 12 months is committing crimes against humanity and a war of extermination that resulted in thousands of martyrs. My daughter and wife were martyred around 8 months ago, and I am bidding farewell to 8 family members today.
Amnesty International Israel, however, rejects the report. The organization says in a statement to the press that the report's authors reached a, quote, predetermined conclusion, and that it, quote, does not accept the claim that genocide has been proven to be taking place in the Gaza Strip and does not accept the operative findings of the report. They also go on saying they were not involved in the research, funding or writing of the report. The Israeli Foreign Ministry slammed Amnesty's accusations with a statement saying, the deplorable and fanatical organization Amnesty International has once again produced a fabricated report that is entirely false and based on lies. The genocidal massacre on October 7 was carried out by the Hamas terrorist organization against Israeli citizens. Since then, Israeli citizens have been subjected to daily attacks from 7 different fronts. Israel is defending itself against these attacks, acting fully in accordance with international law. And so with this new report, the international pressure on Israel is increasing even more while the war in Gaza still rages on.
Well, with us now, Andrew Fox is a former officer in the British Army and now a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Good to see you, Andrew. So, first of all, what do you make of the timing of this report?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's been launched now before Trump gets into power in January. It's obviously something they've worked on for a long time and have had in their back pockets. And I think what we're seeing internationally now is a ratcheting of global pressure against Israel. There's always an increased spike in lurid and bizarre allegations against the IDF. And this is a kind of extension of that in many ways. And it always happens just as Hamas are under real pressure, which clearly they are with a Trump presidency about to take over.
And if you delve into this report and you go to page 101, there's an interesting paragraph where Amnesty tries to justify why it's redefined the word genocide. What do you interpret into that?
You know, I'm in two minds with this report, whether we should even be giving it the dignity of taking it seriously. Quite frankly, none of the facts on the ground remotely support an accusation of genocide. And I think what they've done is an awful lot of research, realised that their research was leading them to a different conclusion, and so have reinvented the meaning of the word genocide to try and make sure that the facts fit what they want it to fit. If you look at the intent paragraphs they pulled out, you know, they're ludicrous. There's even a speech by Herzog where he goes on to say, in the very same speech they're quoting, that the IDF does everything it can to protect civilians. They quote, you know, the Amalek, they dedicate 7 pages to the use of Netanyahu's using the word Amalek, when in the very same sentence, he goes on to say that he's talking specifically about Hamas. I mean, it's a foundation of absolute sand, and frankly, it doesn't deserve to be taken particularly seriously.
Well, lay it out for our viewers then. As a military expert who has been into Gaza with the IDF several times, why and how is Israel not committing genocide?
Well, we have to break it down into 2 halves. The first half is the intent, and you have to show that. It's called dolus specialis. You have to show this under international law. It's a very specific intent to actually wipe out a race of people. And there's not a scrap of evidence to support that. So we can discount it straight from the word go. And then the other half is what's actually happening on the ground. Yes, people are dying. Yes, people are suffering, but it's a war zone. That doesn't make it a genocide. Nobody's saying that Israel is is stopping births or forcibly relocating children. And so that leaves us with only the final elements of genocide, which is creating conditions designed to exterminate people. And the sheer numbers, even the numbers Hamas pushes out of 45,000 dead, don't support that. You know, 2.4 million before they started, probably slightly more now. The birth rate in Gaza is exceeding the death rate. And so under no possible definition of genocide can we say that is what's happening in Gaza. It just is absolute nonsense.
Nevertheless, very few people will read the whole of this report, but there will be headlines around the world, and people will say, you know, there it is. Amnesty International, very credible organisation, says that Israel is committing genocide. How would you suggest that Israelis and supporters of Israel rebuff these allegations?
I think sticking to the facts is the only thing you can do, and keep telling the truth. And it's been a frustration of mine in many ways that the Israeli information campaign that the IDF and the Israeli government have run has been essentially based on doing just that, because it's not particularly effective when your enemy is trying to rely on generating strong negative emotions in the people it's focusing its messaging on. But really, when it comes to genocide, that's all you can do. Just keep explaining simply that there's no characteristic of the Genocide Convention that the actions in Gaza fulfill, least of all the fact that hardly any civilians have died for the amount of munitions dropped. It's about 20,000, I would guess, if you take off the Hamas fighters from the Hamas overall total. That's a tiny number for the amount of munitions dropped, and it's a testament to how well the IDF has done civilian protection that so few have died in Gaza. It's actually something the IDF should be praised for in some ways.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society.
Thank you.
So Ruth and Jonathan with me in the studio. Jonathan, I mean, how does this report help the Palestinians, I'm wondering?
Well, at this time, I don't think any one of these human rights organizations are really interested in what's happening with the Palestinians, or they really care for the Palestinians whatsoever. At the end of the day, what they want to do is they want to attack Israel. They want to make sure that Israel is being attacked for actions that has nothing to do with Israel, or that has nothing to do with reality. We are in some sort of a way in this like post-fact era where suddenly definitions has no meanings anymore. It's all about feelings. It's all about what I'm kind of sensing that the situation is, whether it's happening on the ground or not. I mean, this definition of genocide was coined after World War II by a Jewish lawyer that defined that at the end of the day, a genocide means the intent of erasing a whole group of people because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, and goes on. There's nothing relates to that in what's going on with Gaza. Quite the contrary. At the end of the day, Israel stayed in Gaza for a year and 3 months in order to make sure that as many as possible innocent people wouldn't be hurt and wouldn't be injured. We are going way out of beyond. IDF soldiers are being killed in the battlefield inside of Gaza instead of just dropping bombs from the air, which the IDF can actually do that in order to make sure that we're not really crossing the red lines and making sure that, they will be able to maintain some sort of stability of life after the war. And that's something that at the end of the day, these international organizations just keep on meddling and changing those definitions that has really hard meaning, and you can't just do that. And I feel this is something that came in this like post era of actually truth and facts that
Right. I mean, thank you. I mean, Amnesty International, Ruth, used to, of course, champion the causes of political prisoners, and it was a very credible organisation. They do seem to be chasing headlines now. I mentioned that deep in the report they had to redefine the word genocide. I mean, they're at risk of losing their credibility altogether, aren't they? Not just with people who support Israel.
We're just seeing what is happening, for example, in Syria. The Syrian president targeted his own population, indiscriminately killing men, women, and children, also using chemicals as a weapon of mass destruction. That's an example of indiscriminate killing, wanting to kill civilians. Likewise, the Russians just came for the aid of President Assad when those jihadis had taken over some of his cities. What they are doing is literally bombarding whole cities indiscriminately in order to help. No one is coming to ask whether they are killing discriminately, indiscriminately, what they are doing and why they're doing. There is an obsession with Israel and every step that Israel is taking. And perhaps it's good, and perhaps it is an absolute hypocrisy on the part of the world. The only good thing about it is that Israel is indeed walking every step of the way with lawyers and in respect and with respect to international law, taking great concern, and many urban warfare experts have said that have nothing to do with Israel and or the Jewish faith. They've said they've taken great risk in order to make sure that civilians are not killed. Furthermore, had we not taken those risks, we could have ended the war much sooner. This is exactly the reason why we're in there such a long time.
All right, thank you both. Hezbollah lost almost half of its weapons stockpile during just over a year of fighting with Israel, but it's now looking to rearm and recruit more fighters. That's according to the latest American military assessment. A week-old ceasefire between Israel and the group is holding despite allegations of violations on both sides. Well, today, Israel's foreign minister discussed the situation with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken during talks in Malta. And we did hear from the head of Hezbollah earlier today, Naim Qassem, Jonathan, who was talking about the situation in Syria. And he insists he will continue to fight Israel. For him, the war is very much not over. And that seems to be the same theory here in Israel, that the war is not over. This is just a pause.
Yeah, Naim Qassem, I think in this speech, there's really interesting remarks that he makes. First of all, he says that this war was the hardest war that the organization has ever fought since its establishment in 1982. And this is something significant because it means that Israel hit them really hard in this war. And he defines victory really differently from anybody else around the world by saying that our victory is for us actually standing still in some sort of a way and able now to regain power back. Although he recognizes, and this is something that is really interesting, although I don't really trust that man for my own personal reasons, he said that they agreed on the 1701 UN resolution that was signed in 2006 that basically means, and he also says it, that there will be be no forces that are not Lebanese forces beneath the Litani
South of
River.
the Litani, yeah.
This is something that is really crucial and really important, because at the end of the day, Lebanon today is in a position where they're fighting for their own definition, for their own freedom, for their own, you can say, independence in the upcoming year. We are looking on electing a new president in the next month, and this is something that could really show where this country is going to be go, whether they're going to be 100% fully supportive of a president that his main goal would be to disarm Hezbollah from all of its weapons 100%, or would be someone else that will just let Hezbollah do that again. And that's why I believe that Israel needs to maintain its capability to operate in Lebanon if there is a break from the Hezbollah side on rearming, regaining their power again, and also getting closer to the Israeli border, because we are in a new Middle East. And this is something they also need to understand, that Israel can't keep Hezbollah like it was back then. We can't go back to October 7th before Hezbollah decided to join this war with Hamas.
Otherwise, nobody will be moving back, and Israel could potentially lose control of the Galilee. Ruth, we're hearing that the US envoy Amos Hochstein is on his way to Beirut to kind of supervise the ceasefire. There were a few hiccups this week, weren't there? Both the Americans and the French accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire, even though the Americans did put a caveat in that ceasefire to say that Israel can and should act when necessary for defensive purposes. Do you see it holding? Is this a satisfactory situation for Israel right now?
I think it's a very unsatisfactory situation. In fact, I think this is a very dangerous situation, because as a matter of fact, Naim Qassem is being more sophisticated than his predecessor. He's saying, yes, we will adhere to the international law. We will do what 1701 says, even though they hadn't done so for the past 18 years. Nothing has changed. We will move north of the Litani. We will not move south, but they will let their civilians go back, those Shiite civilians, and
who were happy to have a rocket stored in the garage.
Exactly. But even if it's not a rocket, but just embedding themselves within the civilian population, which is exactly what they will do. I'm counting the minutes. That's exactly what they will do once the civilians come back, because this is what they do. This is the roadmap, and then building and rearming themselves, preparing themselves for the continuation of the war.
The question is whether the Lebanese, the non-Hezbollah population, will let them do that.
So this is a question in leadership and courage. If the Lebanese will see this as an opportunity to oust that absolutely foreign body serving the Islamic Republic of Iran, and in no way Lebanon and its people, then there is some hope. And I'm putting my hope in the Lebanese people. But the Israeli government has a responsibility to not only put our hopes and prayers in the Lebanese people, but to make sure and take it into their own hands that our civilians in the north will not be hurt.
Okay, thank you both. Well, Lebanon might be very much affected by what is happening next door, because Syrian rebels have taken the city of Hama and are marching towards Homs. That's the last city on the path to Damascus. We'll have the latest on the situation there after the break. Stay tuned.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Syrian opposition forces have retaken a second major city just days after they launched their assault on government-held areas. Regime forces have confirmed they've withdrawn from the city of Hama, and the rebels are now marching on Homs. That's the last city on the path to Damascus. Well, these rebels are led by an offshoot of al-Qaeda and the Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army. Israel says it is monitoring the situation carefully. Our Alfie Moore has this report.
The civil war that has gripped and devastated Syria for nearly 14 years is back, and with a vengeance, as armed groups take on the Assad regime forces in the western countryside of Aleppo in the north of the country.
The city of Tel Rifa'at and its surroundings were completely liberated, and a number of tanks and helicopters were captured. We captured a number of prisoners of war from al-Assad's groups, and praise be to God. But we are waiting for the area to be cleared of mines so that our civilian brothers can return to their homes.
In clashes with regime forces, anti-regime groups took control of 16 additional locations after capturing Pasif, El-Sid, Al-Karim and Hamra earlier in the day. The Syrian Ministry of Defense claimed that the report was false and stated that, quote, "The situation in every area of Hama is normal and safe. Our forces are deployed in outposts near and far from the city in all directions, ready to repel and confront any possible attack."
Thank God, after 6 or 7 years, God helped us prosper, and we returned with honor and respected, and we returned to our families with honor, with God's will, and we are no more with this dog, this pig.
Additionally, the Syrian rebels have captured the Armored Corps school near Hama city center, which is one of the regime's key bases and serves as the main headquarters for the 25th Brigade.
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, I inform you, my brothers, that your brothers, the Mujahideen fighters, have begun to enter the city of Hama to cleanse the wound that has endured in Syria for 40 years. I ask God Almighty to make it a conquest with no revenge, but a conquest of mercy and fellowship. Praise be to God.
With the news, residents are excited to return to their homes after being displaced by the fighting and the control of the Assad regime.
We are on the way to Aleppo after more than 8 years, thanks be to God. Thanks to God, we will go back and be reunited with our family.
But with Russian warships increasing their missile attacks on the region in support of Assad, the happiness to return home may be short-lived.
So the rebels are marching on, and while there has been footage online of euphoric Syrian civilians returning to their homes for the first time in years, there has been other disturbing video of civilians being displaced or worse. Here to talk about that, Arya Gemo is an independent humanitarian activist from Syria. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Arya. So let me get this right. You're a member of the Kurdish and Yazidi communities. Tell us what has been happening to your family, to your people in Syria over the past few days.
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for covering this subject that I think is very important for the region and the world overall. We are very tempted, after almost 14 years of Syrian war, civil war, to call it as these are Syrian rebels and Syria is going to be free. Unfortunately, I'm here to actually witness and tell you that this is actually not what's going to happen. I'm indeed from the Kurdish Yazidi community in Afrin, not far from Idlib, that is under control of this group since now 6 years, since 2018, with the active support by Turkey. And what we can see there on the ground is some attempt to the human rights of every population, some stealing, kidnapping, and the Sharia is in place over there. So in terms of human rights and living conditions, the Syrians won't be as happy as they think they would be by the relief of having Bashar al-Assad living, unfortunately, as much as I don't support him as well. They currently have the choice between these Islamists that are coming from Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. We can clearly see the signs within the fighters of HTS. So what is coming after for the civilians is very, very bad.
So we're hearing about large numbers of people who are having to flee their homes and move to other parts of Syria, parts that were, until recently, relatively peaceful and under Kurdish control.
Absolutely. This was always the case with the with the Syrian war, is that most of the civilians fleeing and that cannot go abroad will actually take refuge in the Kurdish control area, because the system in place actually do respect them in opposition to the one from the HTS. And let me remind you also something, by the way that the HTS is governing, is not for the Syrian interests. When you go to the occupied region of Idlib or Afrin, what you will see is Turkish flags around, Turkish lira being used, the Turkish electricity, your phone will be on Turkish GSM network. So that leads to a question, are we really liberating Syria here, or is there something else? Because from already the Aleppo government, some of the offices, you can already see a Turkish flag inside and a picture of Erdogan. So what will come next for the Syrian? I'm not sure, but I highly doubt that it would be good, as it wasn't good already 6 years ago for Afrin and Idlib.
And of course, the Kurdish fighters did the West a very big favour back when ISIS took over large swathes of Syria and Iraq. They faced down the jihadists and they won the support of the Americans. But what is the situation now? Have the Kurds been abandoned in Syria, and how can they now protect themselves?
They are currently being abandoned, indeed. The Kurds have been the only force that made a corridor in Sheikh Massoud and in the different district of Aleppo in order to save civilian lives. So we're speaking about dozens of thousands of people who are currently fleeing. There are some numbers of 20,000, some numbers of 50,000. It is yet unclear. And the Kurdish forces have been alone there. They've been alone securing a corridor for people to flee. They've been alone to secure these people homes, these people lands. And now they are still accusing attacks from the SNA, supported by Turkey, against the Kurdish forces and the populations that are fleeing. So now the population is slowly moving to deeper part of Rojava, to Kobane and so on. That is also heavily attacked by the Turkish military aircraft. So they don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't have gas, because all the civilian infrastructure have been targeted months ago, if not years.
So how do you see the power play happening in Syria moving forward then? Because you've got the Turks, as you said, who are behind some of these jihadist groups in the Free Syrian Army. You've got the Americans, who are a bit ambiguous, and we don't know what the political situation will be once Trump comes back. And of course, you've got the failing Assad regime, which is being propped up by Iran. I mean, what do you see as the future coming out of this for your people?
Well, it looks like the Assad regime is currently very weak and might lose again some position, but it's yet unclear with the support of Iran and Russia. What is for sure is that as much as the HTC and the SNA are winning different locations and keep position, Hama and Aleppo are very big cities which they can expand and grow their influence. that will be translated by more influence by this dangerous jihadist group on the ground that will be not only attacking Syrians, but will be attacking also worldwide. They will be reinforcing their communication strategy, their marketing strategy, and recruiting. Because among those fighters that we're seeing, we find people from Oro, from Kazakhstan, from Uzbekistan. They were hired, and this hiring process will continue. They will continue to create these jihadist groups and send it over also internationally. We've seen these forces that are currently attacking Bashar al-Assad regime attacked Libya, Armenia, and other places in the world, maybe in the future.
Aria Gemo, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Ruth Wasserman Lande and Jonathan Elkhoury are with me in the studio. So, Ruth, the Israeli Defense Minister says that he is looking closely at the situation in Syria. They're holding a meeting right now. What is the best outcome for Israel? Are there any good options here?
Well, it's basically the possibility to choose between one bad option and another bad option. We're talking about radicals who are willing to use chemical weapons of mass destruction on their own people, which is the Bashar al-Assad regime, together with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Everybody knows what they do to their own people, and with the help of Russia. And on the other side, we have Erdogan, who very clearly is a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood, together with other groups, jihadist groups that actually don't get along with one another, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, but like others that are under the support of Turkey, and some that are completely not supported by Turkey. On the contrary, they are written as terrorist organizations in the Turkish law. So it's a big salad of very, very radical Islamist Sunni groups. As many of the civilians that have been interviewed had said, do we want Syria to be free of one radical factor that carnaged our people, and actually have a different salad, a myriad of leaders that would carnage us in another manner? No.
And you've got to feel for civilians in Damascus tonight. There must be a real sense of panicking just for the sheer speed of how quickly these forces are advancing. The Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, made a comment last week. He said that Kurds are Israel's natural allies. Do you think that Israel should reach out more to the Kurdish people in Syria and Iraq?
Oh, yeah. I think we've seen a lot of Kurdish support towards Israel and towards the Israeli cause, and basically accepting the Israeli state to exist as it is. I've met with a lot of Kurds also when I traveled and spoke in a lot of conferences and speeches that I did throughout Europe, where they had to flee from the Middle East because they were persecuted because of who they are. But Arya, when I heard Arya speak right now, when you did the interview with him, it really reminded me of my personal story and my family's story inside of Lebanon, where we suddenly found ourselves abandoned by the country, by Lebanon, to a terrorist organization that was back then with the head of Yasser Arafat and the PLO organization that slaughtered Christians in Lebanon, slaughtered other people that didn't agree with their move. That this is basically the same thing that is happening.
And no protection.
Yet on the other hand, exactly. Yet on the other hand, the West kind of ignored everything and are not really coming to help and assist those indigenous people that this is their rightful right for self-determination that is being prevented from them by the Assad regime, by the Turks, also by them. We all remember also how Turkey did, the Holocaust with the Armenians. This is something that is, like you can say, history repeating itself with these minorities in the Middle East that not necessarily fits in with the majority that is controlling this area or wants to control them under their Sharia law. And that's something that really concerns, because when Hassan Nasrallah in the beginning of the 1980s, when he started to go out in power, he said that Lebanon needs to turn to and become a Khalifa Shia under the Ayatollah of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that's something that we're really hearing right now from one side by the Shia supporters, by the Hezbollah supporters and other fractions of the Shia communities that are living in Syria fighting with the Assad regime. And on the other hand, we're hearing the Islamic state with ISIS and other fractions that want to do the same thing, but in the opposite way of things. And we have these innocent people that at the end of the day are the ones who are paying the price of the silent of the world.
And the very interesting thing is that Amnesty International, instead of looking into this very complex situation, is obsessed with Israel.
And in one sentence, it really amazes me. On October 8th, we already had demonstrations all across of the major European cities demonstrating against Israel. We are 1 week after this mess gained again public opinion, and nothing.
And some analysts say that Turkey actually had a big hand in that as well, in what we've seen on the streets of European cities in recent years. I mean, what in terms of the populations there, but also the stirring up, the Muslim Brotherhood rhetoric and all the rest of it. So this could turn out to work out very well for Erdogan.
Turkey, we need to understand that Erdogan's Turkey, not all the Turkish civilians, but Erdogan's Turkey is Islamist. He is a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood. He always has been. And this is a country that is very strong militarily, very well placed, and is a member of NATO. And this is a very important thing to consider.
All right. Thank you both for now. OK, let's move slightly to the south, because Tunisia is investing more than $100 million in American-made Javelin missiles. The sale to a non-NATO ally is designed to help the North African state defend its territorial sovereignty. Morocco recently made a similar investment. This despite concerns Tunisia has reverted to autocracy under the current president, Kais Saied. Well, let's get more on that with Elisa Pavia. She's Associate Director at the North Africa Programme at the Atlantic Council. Good to see you, Elisa. So, first of all, why does Tunisia need this kind of weapon in the first place?
Hi, Laura. It's great to be back. Well, Tunisia is now in an interesting spot, just like a lot of the North African countries, because it is bordering with the Sahel, and the Sahel we know is engulfed in and mired by political tensions and coups, and a number of very of terrorist organizations are emerging, and so these can pose a significant threat to Tunisia and neighboring countries as well.
And is the US looking to develop closer ties with Tunisia as it is with Morocco?
So the relationship with Tunisia on the counterterrorism side has been quite strong already since 2015. Like you mentioned, Tunisia is a non-NATO major ally. Okay, and what this means is that Tunisia has access to a number of defense-related tasks and issues. And so what this means is that there's a strong relationship between the US and Tunisia on the counterterrorism side. So the US will want to continue on that relationship and continue providing that support to Tunisia, because the US does see these terrorist organizations as a threat to its interests as well, but also because, as we're seeing great power competition continue in North Africa, the U.S. wants to maintain the stronghold when it comes to Tunisia, so that it can maintain that alliance strong and not allow countries like Russia or China to overwhelm the Americans.
Well, in the past, the Americans have linked progress on human rights to weapons sales. Egypt immediately springs to mind. But we are seeing repression worsen in Tunisia. That seems not to be a concern this time.
It is a concern. So people in Washington are discussing the ongoing crackdown on political opposition, the ongoing crackdown on democratic institutions. When Kais Saied initiated his coup in 2021, he did use military tanks, and that many critics argued that were funded by US dollars and worried about that. And there has been growing concern and talks about decreasing funding to the military and defense expenditure in Tunisia. However, right now, it seems as though the opportunities outweigh the risks for the United States, and so they're keen to maintain that relationship going when it comes to counterterrorism and in general security issues. But they are cutting costs on other projects. They're cutting costs on USAID projects and other democracy-related funding projects, precisely because of the crackdown on democracy.
Elisa, thank you very much. Great to talk to you as always. Elisa Pavia there.
Hi, Laura.
Now, last year they banned the film Barbie. This year it's the musical Wicked. The Gulf state of Kuwait has deemed the musical inappropriate, reportedly because of its so-called LGBT undertones. Well, for more on that, let's go to Dubai. We're joined by Bastien Bory. So, Bastien, the musical was banned just a day before it was supposed to hit the theatres. What happened?
Well, the first hint of an explanation is coming from one of the lawyers who's working with the governments of the Gulf countries to put pressure, or at least to try to put pressure on film distributors, including Netflix and other companies like Disney. These clips and movie scenes are, quote unquote, unfortunate and painful for our children. Officials in Kuwait have yet to announce why this film was removed from Kuwaiti cinemas, but local media there have already speculated, as you said, that it's indeed due to the inclusion of an LGBTQ cast, with some of the actors identifying as queer.
Even though there are no such scenes in the actual film itself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Kuwait is actually among the Gulf countries that are considered to be more liberal. So that's pretty surprising.
Well, it's quite a juxtaposition to what we saw in Saudi Arabia not so long ago with Jennifer Lopez strutting around in a pretty skimpy outfit in front of a mock-up of the Kaaba. What's happening there?
Well, it happens in pretty much every Gulf country, like the UAE and Bahrain, for instance. Films and movies are routinely cut or at least edited. The UAE, 2 years ago, for instance, banned the Disney animated film Lightyear, which contained a lesbian kiss. But the largest number of complaints are indeed issued by Saudi Arabia, which only opened cinemas for the very first time 6 years ago, and lately had asked Disney to cut LGBTQ references from in the Marvel superhero movie Doctor Strange. And at the same time, Saudi officials were filmed seizing rainbow-colored toys and clothing from shops in Riyadh as part of this crackdown on homosexuality, which is still today a potential capital offense in Saudi Arabia. And if you turn on some Arab TV channels in the Gulf, you will often hear debates deploring movies and series for children with scenes promoting homosexuality and kisses between female characters. So this is something that governments here do not really want to compromise on, but it's also likely and pretty much inevitable that this is going to evolve step by step.
American filmmakers will presumably still want access to this very lucrative market. Any sign that they're willing to adapt their screenplays to suit the tastes of the Arab states?
No, not really. Disney, for instance, did not comply after the Saudi warning on the movie Doctor Strange, and the film was just not screened in the country. Gulf states are also regularly clashing with US film distributors over content related to sexual minorities, and the stance here is there won't be any censorship in our countries if there is no offensive material, which pretty much turns this whole thing into just head-on disputes.
Interesting. Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bory over in Dubai. Jonathan Elkhoury and Ruth Wasserman Lande with me in the studio. I mean, do you think that cinema goers in Kuwait are being deprived of something important there?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a disgrace that we're still meddling in some sort of a way that, at the end of the day, this is who people are. This is something that a law can't prevent.
It's the death penalty in the...
Exactly, and this is something that I think we need to kind of advance to the 21st century and, you know, going into the 22nd century shortly. But this is something that we kind of see a lot all over the Middle East, where LGBTQ plus minorities are being persecuted. But on a personal note, I think if the Kuwait government would have just listened to Defying Gravity, they maybe have, they could have changed a little bit of their kind of thoughts about that. Because at the end of the day, this is also something that, you know, people, you can hold people from being who they are to some sort of a point. This is something that will change at the end of the day. We saw also other Arabic countries like the UAE, like Bahrain, that kind of, you know, just But an eye, just hit an eye on it. Just
turn a blind eye.
Exactly, and just
live.
let it happen, because at the end of the day, when you prevent something, you would just make a bigger fuss around it. At the end of the day, people also in Kuwait have VPNs and have other opportunities to go and watch these movies if they want to watch them. So there is some sort of places that I think the government needs to stop meddling in personal lives, people.
And Ruth, the Gulf states, they're trying to tread a fine line, aren't they? They're trying to modernise, but there are some things they're just not willing to tolerate.
Well, I know that in countries like the UAE, that is all about inclusion and tolerance and so on, and also, you know, accepting other religions. They sort of turn a blind eye, do whatever you want in private. You cannot do that in public. In fact, you cannot even show physical affection between a man and a woman in public.
Yeah.
So respect, I would suggest, you know, respect the general atmosphere and the ambiance of the place, or the religious sensitivities up to a point. If they allow you to be who you are, at least in your private life.
And of course, it didn't seem to matter for the British royal family, who just welcomed the Qataris to Buckingham Palace.
Oh, they welcomed them with splendour.
Red carpet, the lot.
And the Qatari partner, the partner of the Emir, was not covered. Her head was not covered.
Absolutely, yes, I noticed that.
In open, which is a very interesting phenomenon, I would say.
Very interesting. Ruth, Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.